If you have questions, especially about what you hear here today, but questions about the Lord, about life, about the scriptures, that's what we're here for. And we're not in a hurry. We're willing to take the time to stand and sit and whatever. If we don't have time here, we can meet you somewhere in a restaurant or your home, and we can sit down and answer all your questions. So please ask. Especially ask Michael about anything he says. Ask me. We're both available, and we're happy to take the time. And we want you to feel welcome among us today. We want you to feel like you have a home here. We want you to get excited about being in church. We want you to fall in love with being among us. And so we hope that you feel that way when you're here. And I have a few announcements to go through today. First one is those of you who know Danny Kennel. He had some severe abdominal pain the other day, last night. They took him in. They found a lump. They don't know what it is. They're preparing to do some tests to find out. Carly has asked us to pray that it is not cancerous. So please be in prayer for Danny and his family. And Tim and Sadie are out ill. Pray for them that they will experience a full recovery. Daniel and Joycey are traveling right now, and we haven't seen our sister Joyce from New York in a little while. She did get ill after her friends went back to New York, and so please be in prayer for her as well. And for the family of Charlie Kirk and the memorial, pray that the gospel would be presented clearly, and pray for them in their time of loss and grief. And then finally, on October 11th, which will be a Saturday evening at 6 p.m., right here in the church, we will have an hour of just straight music and worship. It's not going to be a time of sermon preaching and things like that, just music and worship for an hour here at the church, October 11th, a Saturday evening at 6 p.m. Are there any other announcements? Well, then, without further ado, please give your attention to the reading of the Word of God, and please stand with me.
Good morning. The reading today will be in 3 John, the 14 verses in 3 John. The elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. For I rejoiced greatly when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou does it to the brethren and to strangers, which have borne witness of thy charity before the church, whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well. Because that for his name's sake they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles, we therefore ought to receive such, that we might be fellow helpers of the truth. I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, received us not. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds, which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither that he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that he would, and casteth them out of the church. Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, and he that doeth evil hath not seen God. Demetrius hath good report of all men, and of the truth itself. And we also bear record, and ye know that our record is true. I had many things to write, but I will not with ink and pen write unto thee. But I trust I shall shortly see thee, and we shall speak face to face. Peace be to thee. Our friends salute thee. Greet thy friends by name. This is the word of God.
Well, very good. Excellent. Thank you, all of you, for the music and the reading. That was great. We are in 3 John. We're getting really close to the end of the New Testament. We have 2 more books after this, and we're going through. For those that don't know, we're going through, at least I'm going through, and we're looking at just a summary of each of the books of the New Testament. So that when you read the book, and obviously we, as I said over and over, we are skipping over a lot of important information and a lot of things that you think, well, the book talks about a lot. It does. What I'm trying to look at is, what are these writers trying to get across as their main point? And I think that is the proper way of approaching any literature, but especially the scriptures. I think that this taking apart the Bible into verses and little quote texts, and you're wrong because I have this verse, that type of approach to the scriptures is not helpful, I don't think, very much helpful to anybody. I think that these writers had something they were trying to communicate, and if we believe that that is by inspiration, which I do believe that, then we should try to understand what they're trying to communicate as a whole, so then we can take all the parts and put them into that context. And that's really important, to have a sound understanding of the Bible, is to understand the context. Extremely important. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at what these are talking about. So we're in 3 John. This is a book about helping, about hospitality, which was incredibly important in the ancient world, and it was even more so important in the Christian church. Hospitality was extremely important. But it's not just about helping or hospitality, it's about what he calls being a fellow helper, which is kind of a compound word he throws together, but what he means by this is that this is not just me helping you or you helping me. But John is concerned about a partnership, about a reciprocal thing, that hospitality is something that is reciprocal. And this is how the early church was put together. It's one of the things they put a tremendous amount of importance on. It is discussed extensively throughout the scriptures, and we find it in all the ancient writings of the church going back to the 2nd and 3rd, 4th centuries. This was a very important issue for the church back then. And I think that many of us Christians have gotten away from that, because we live in a time where hospitality doesn't seem to be that important. Because you're so self-sufficient, right? You can go to McDonald's and buy your own burger. You don't need help. You can make your own food. You have your own bank account. And when you travel, you have Airbnb. What do you need hospitality for? You don't feel you do. And so it just seems to be something that is like, it's like one of those vestiges of the past. It's like something that Grandpappy used to do, but that's not for the modern age. And that's just not how the New Testament teaches it. So either we accept that the New Testament speaks to us right now today, or we say that it doesn't, and it's this ancient book that really we shouldn't even bother with anymore. Now, I'm firmly in the camp that the Bible is a living, breathing Word of God, and it speaks to us today, right now. And therefore, we don't get to say that something that seems ancient and out of touch with reality or out of touch with current reality, that somehow we just get to put that aside. We as Christians are called to live in the example of Jesus, who was someone who lived 2,000 years ago. And so, John writes this very short book, and largely is dealing with hospitality. Like I said, hospitality is this mutual, reciprocal helping. It is not just a matter of giving, but it's also of receiving. There is a lesbian activist out of Columbia who was a professor, maybe about 20 years ago. She was a professor at Columbia, and she gets saved. And her testimony, her name is Rosaria Butterfield. She has a number of books out, great books. I especially like the one on her testimony. But anyway, she says that she got saved because she was looking to interview an evangelical. She wanted to show her students that she wasn't afraid to interact with the enemy. And so she found in her hate mail a letter from a Christian pastor who was extremely nice and kind to her, even though he disagreed with her viewpoints that she had published in the little community newspaper. And so she reached out to him, and he welcomed her into their home. And it became her second home. And even though they disagreed passionately, because she was a very big LGBTQ activist, and they disagreed obviously very deeply on that issue, but she was always welcome in his home with his wife, and they became very good friends. And over time, she converted to Christ and committed herself to Jesus Christ, and now writes books explaining the flaws and the problems with the LGBTQ ideology and lifestyle. She's now married, has children. Anyways, she wrote a book on this issue called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. And in it she says this. She says that all Christians are either giving or receiving from the church. There are no independent agents, onlookers, or renters. The church is not an audience and a speaker. The church is not a small group of people helping a larger group of people, or a large group of people helping a small group of people. The church is a community. It is a family in which everyone participates. Sometimes that participation is receiving, and other times it's giving. And everyone should be taking part in both of these in so much as they need and are able to. You're here and you say, I have no ability to help. Then you need to be helped. You need to receive. If you're here and you say, I don't need to receive anything, well, then you need to give. And I don't just mean money. I mean time. I mean interest. I mean concern. Hospitality is not just letting someone stay at your house when they're coming through. Hospitality is not just inviting a person over for dinner on Sunday afternoon, although it includes that. It is much, much more than that. And if we were to look to the first century Christian church as an example of hospitality, we would do very well, and we would see that they meant a lot more by that than how it's often considered today. The church at its core is this reciprocal community, because the church is born out of a mutual commitment to Jesus, where we commit ourselves to him because he's committed himself to us. So everything about Christianity is reciprocal. We don't come to God groveling and begging and hoping that if we're good enough, or pray good enough, or hard enough, that somehow he might deign to look at us. Not at all. That is a caricature that is often portrayed by agnostics and atheists about God, that somehow God is like this mean being, and Christians are just trying to somehow please him, somehow hopefully get his attention. That is not true at all. The Bible tells us that it is the exact opposite. It is Christ who left everything. God left everything, made himself one of us at the very lowest station possible in life to get our attention. Not so we could get his. We have his attention. It's our attention that God is trying to get. He is giving himself first. It says, John says, and in 1 John he says, we love him because he first loved us. Paul, even though he doesn't phrase it in such a pithy manner, essentially says the same thing about faith. You have faith in God only because he's faithful first. That's why he says faith is a gift of God. God has reached out to us first, and we respond to him. So that's how Christianity works. And so that's how it works across the board. And it carries on in how we treat each other. We're to be reciprocal with each other. We are to reach out to each other first. And that's how hospitality is supposed to work. In the first part of the meeting, Kelly mentioned the parable of the prodigal, and in that we have a very similar thing. We have a younger son who's in need, and we have an older son who has capacity. And the older son is being chastised, is being reprimanded in the parable because he doesn't reciprocate to the younger son. The younger son reaches out and says, I'm in need. And the older son says, you don't deserve help. And that's the point that Jesus is trying to reprimand in there. So hospitality was a critical element of the early Christian church. And you might think, well, that's just because that was the culture of ancient times. And that is true. Ancient culture was far more hospitable, if you want to call it. We will look at that in a second. It was far more hospitable than modern culture tends to be. But there's reasons for that. And there's a theologian out of Truett Theological who wrote a monograph on this. Very good little, it's hard to come by, but you can find it online if you look for it. But it's called Entertaining Angels. And he goes through and he examines the hospitality of the Jewish community, hospitality in pagan communities, and then he contrasts those with the hospitality of the Christian community, because he shows these are not the same thing. Jews and Gentiles, for instance, did not practice hospitality in the same way or for the same reasons. And neither of them were hospitable in the way Christians were. Christians were very, very different from both groups. So Jews, they were hospitable, but it had to do with being part of their community. You had to be a Jew in order to truly receive the hospitality that Jews offered. And with the pagans, it wasn't so much about a religious community, but it was about class, and it was about patronage. For those that don't know, patronage just means that that somebody who's wealthy or has some power, maybe political influence, they would take under their wing, so to speak. They would mentor people who would then be beholden to them to stand with them maybe in a vote or to help them with some dispute that they might have with someone else or whatever. But you would be beholden to your mentor to repay the kindness they showed you by inviting you to their house for dinner, for having you stay at their home, and for other forms of hospitality. So it was a power play. For the pagans, hospitality was a power play. It's an old refrain in the Arabic communities that you're perfectly safe with your worst enemy so long as you're in his home. Because in the Arabic communities, hospitality, right? If you're in their home, it would be just this terrible this terrible slight or offense for anything to happen to you. But the moment you leave the house, right? It's like when we tell people in church, it's like, I love you in Christ, but if I catch you in the parking lot, right? It's kind of that. That's kind of, but in a much, much darker way. And so we see that's how pagan hospitality worked. Christian hospitality didn't work in either way like that. It wasn't about whether or not you were part of their religious community. And it wasn't about what station in life or what benefit you might bring to the person over time. What he explains is that the Christian hospitality differed from pagan and Jewish hospitality in three categories. They had unexpected guests, unexpected hosts, and unexpected motives. For instance, when you have a jailer showing hospitality to jailbirds, like the Philippian jailer bringing Paul and Silas, who are essentially runaway prisoners in a sense, right? They're escapees in some way. He brings them into their home and shows them hospitality. He was already entering into the experience or the tradition of Christian hospitality. You had Simon the tanner. A tanner is someone who works leather, who takes animal carcasses, strips the hides off, and turns it into leather. Those are tanners. That was a profession that most Jews wanted nothing to do with, because the Old Testament law condemned touching carcasses. So that would be maybe a similar profession today would be an outhouse cleaner, right? A porta-john cleaner. I don't know if any of you have been on construction sites. If you haven't, you might not know how that's pertinent. If you've been on a construction site, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Peter goes and stays with him. Well, that was just the reason the Bible points out what his profession was because that was just an unheard of thing for someone at Peter's place to do. You have Jews hosting Gentiles in the New Testament. You have Gentiles hosting Jews. This all went contrary to all the rules of hospitality. Whether you were pagan or Jew, it didn't matter. All of these things were subversive to what they thought of hospitality. Christians took hospitality and they turned it into this incredibly subversive practice that transformed the world. And it wasn't just that, but you even have women being the host, which was especially against all cultures at the time. And women became many times the hosts in there. So you have Lydia, you have Mary, you have Martha. These are people, these are women who are leading the hospitality, which would generally be reserved only for men in that culture. In the Christian church, all of these distinctions got erased, and hospitality became this enormous reciprocal community that really brought the church all together as one family, not a family composed of a lot of classes the way the pagan families were, or statuses, but it all got leveled out in Christ, to where Paul could say of these churches, there is neither male nor female, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, there's neither slave nor free. In the church, all distinctions stopped at the door. All of them. Didn't matter what color you were, didn't matter what language you spoke, didn't matter what your profession was. You might be a slave in the secular world, but in the church, everything got flattened out. And it's because of how they practiced hospitality. Hospitality was so critical to the first church, that it is in the short list of qualifications to be an elder. You could not be a pastor of a church, according to Paul, if you were not given to hospitality. In another place, he calls it, if you're not a lover of hospitality, if you don't just love to be hospitable, you cannot be the pastor of a church, according to Paul. There are not very many. If you read you can read them. It's in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1. The list of requirements to be a pastor are not that many. It's not a very difficult job. But one of that list is you have to love and be given to hospitality. Now, I've been to a lot of ordinations, and there's not very many of those that I've been to where do they point that out and say and ask, is this person given to hospitality? Do they love hospitality? Are they known to be hospitable? We could probably solve a lot of the problems in many of the churches with leadership if we just start applying these rules more properly. How important was hospitality? It's so important that Jesus says that that Jesus' depiction of the final judgment is entirely based on hospitality. Matthew chapter 25, he says that when he returns in his glory, he's going to divide people. He's going to divide the just from the unjust, the godly from the ungodly. And the measure, what is he looking at? He says to those that enter into glory, he says, you fed me, you clothed me, you housed me, you cared for me. And the ones who go to eternal damnation, he says, you didn't feed me, you didn't clothe me, you didn't house me, you didn't care for me. According to that depiction in Matthew 25, eternal judgment is based on hospitality. So yeah, they thought it was important. You cannot be a follower of Jesus, read Matthew 25 and say, hospitality doesn't matter. It certainly matters. In fact, James, in his epistle, when he's talking about faith and works and how works prove faith, and we can't just say we have faith but don't have works, we say, well, what works, James? What works might you be talking about? The works par excellence of faith, according to James, hospitality. He says if you see somebody in need and you don't somehow help them in their need, how can you say you have faith? Hospitality. Extremely important in the Bible. Now, Christians, they practice it, like I said, very differently from Jews and from pagans, especially from pagans. There is after Constantine converts to Christianity, you have a line of emperors who are now Christians. And then there's one Roman emperor, a few generations after Constantine, who's known as Julian the Apostate, because he's the last Roman emperor who's not a Christian. In fact, he hates Christianity. He despised it. He said, and we don't know if it's true or not, but it's widely reported that when he died in battle and he's bleeding out in the sand, he lifted up handfuls of blood-stained sand towards heaven and said, "Oh, Galilean, you've won." That's what he called Jesus, the Galilean. He hated Christianity. And he hated that Christianity had overcome the empire, because by that time, so many Roman citizens and Roman subjects were Christians that it was politically impossible not to be a Christian. It's like right now in America and has been since our founding. I don't know how long it'll last, but right now you are not going to win the presidency if you're not a Christian. It's just the political reality. You have to at least pay lip service to Christianity in America right now. Now, that may change, and I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And that's how it became in the Roman Empire. The Roman emperors converted because politically you could not be a Christian. It wasn't possible. And he hated that. And he wanted Rome to recapture its pagan greatness. And so he wrote a letter to his priests. We've mentioned it before. But he wrote a letter, and in it he said this. He says, the atheist Galileans, he's referring to Christians. Christians are the original atheists because they don't accept all the gods. All right? They only accept one God. And for Romans, that was atheism. He says the atheist Galileans not only feed their own poor, but ours also. The pagans also welcome them into their love feasts. They attract them as children are attracted with cakes. He says, look at their love feasts and their tables spread for the indigent. Such practice is common among them and causes contempt for our gods. And what he's trying to tell the priests, his pagan priests, is that they need to emulate this Christian hospitality. They can't just be taking care of Roman citizens or the Roman elite. They need to reach out and they need to be more caring for the indigent, the poor, in that way. Now, that was what he thought. He thought he could combat the Christian influence by imitating them, by taking up that mantle. But the pagans, especially the pagan priests, were unwilling to give the way Christians gave, and they were unable to. Christians didn't just give food. They didn't just give clothing or housing. Again, like I said, that's part of hospitality, but that's the tail end of it. They gave themselves. They gave themselves. And they just simply were not able to do that because here's the thing about Christian hospitality, and this is extremely important to understand. Christians gave themselves, but they never gave away the truth. They never compromised. This is extremely important. Oftentimes today we think that to be hospitable, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about religion, we just talk about the weather. Because you don't want to offend anyone, that'd be inhospitable. Christians were radically hospitable. They took care of people who had no interest in Christianity, but they did not silence their voice. They were not, and that's because they were not trying to get people to go to church. See, oftentimes Christians today are saying, yeah, we should be more hospitable, more outreaching, so people will go to church. It is the wrong objective to get people to go to church. You should not be trying to get anyone to go to church. You want to get them to be the church. Because you can go to church your whole life and never be the church. Christians were not trying to get them to change their location. They were trying to get them to change their hearts and be something different. Fundamentally, deeply, be Christians, not be around Christians. Rosaria Butterfield in the book The Gospel Comes with a House Key puts it very well. She says, radical ordinary hospitality characterizes those who don't fuss over different worldviews represented at the dinner table. It means they don't get bent out of shape if somebody they're eating with doesn't agree with them. It's okay. They don't have to agree, and you don't have to try to like get around the subject or not talk about it. It's okay to disagree. It's okay. It might get you killed in this day and age, but it's okay to disagree. She says the truly hospitable aren't embarrassed to keep friendships with people who are different. They know that there is a difference between acceptance and approval. In this day and age, that difference is very blurred. People want you to accept them and approve of them. And what too many evangelical Christians do is they do neither. They cut themselves off from people that disagree with them, and they're angry at them, and they can't have a pleasant conversation about disagreements with them. And that's wrong. We shouldn't be that way. We should be able to accept people even when we don't approve of them. You do it every day already. You just need to transpose it to people who aren't your children. Right? Because you accept your children 100% all the time, even though often you don't approve of their behavior or their ideas. But you never stop loving them. You know how to do this. We all know how to do this. What Christians did is they took that understanding and they applied it outside of their home. Why would they do this? Why would Christians do that? Because Jesus said that if you only behave well with the people you love, that is not sufficient. If you only are nice to the people who are nice to you, well, that's not Christ-like. Jesus came and he gave love to those who did not love him, who hated him. We're Christians when we emulate that example of Christ, not when we behave the way the pagans behave. Jesus said, what do the pagans do? The pagans invite people to their homes who can invite them back. They feed people who can feed them back. They help people who can help them back. That's what the pagans do. That's not what Christians do. Christians go out of their way to help people who could never help them back, who give them no benefit. Rosaria calls this the Jesus paradox. Jesus dined with sinners. He didn't sin with sinners. So you can eat with LGBTQ activists, have pleasant conversation with them, and disagree with them, and tell them why. You do not have to spit in their face, so to speak, to hold to your conscience. And you don't have to relinquish your conscience to be nice. So when we're hospitable, we're doing three very important things. You as a Christian, if you take on the mantle of hospitality, you're doing three important things. One is you're obeying Christ. Christ commands you to be hospitable. This is not a voluntary thing. If you commit yourself to Christ, you're committing yourself to what he has commanded us to do, and he has commanded us to be hospitable. So you're obeying Christ when you're hospitable. Not only you're obeying Christ, you're projecting Christ because he was hospitable. You're letting Christ live through you. Jesus' opportunity for hospitality was cut short. He died very young. And in the book of Isaiah, it tells us that now he springs up like this branch springing out of us. And now that's what Paul says. Remember Paul in that famous declaration he said? He says, the life that I now live isn't mine, but it's the faith that I live by it's the life that I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. It's Jesus. Now I turn over my life and let him live through me so that he can have the full expression of his life through me. And wherever that is not its full expression is because I'm getting in the way. The more transparent, the more out of the way I can make myself, the more Christ projects himself through me and through you. So when you're hospitable, you're letting Christ vicariously fulfill his mission of love and hospitality. And the third thing you're doing according to Scripture is you're redressing Christ. You're making amends. Christ never received hospitality, or not very much. From the time he was born, he was an outcast, out of the inn, into the stable. Now that's just not right. Can you imagine the shame? And this is, you can go back in history and find this in history where it happens. But can you imagine the shame if a dignitary, say the President of the United States, were to visit, let's say, our little congregation, and he was treated poorly? He wasn't welcomed. He wasn't allowed in. He knocked at the door and nobody opened. The shame on us, and how you might feel compelled to want to make amends for that in some way. when we show hospitality according to Matthew 25, because remember in 25 I told you about the judgment, and Jesus says, you housed me, you clothed me, you fed me, you cared for me. And they say, Lord, when? We never met you. And he says, but when you did that to other people, I took it as for me. You and I don't have an opportunity to physically make up for the poor treatment that Jesus received at the hands of humankind. Not directly. But Jesus is saying, when you show hospitality to your fellow human beings, you're making amends. You're righting a wrong that was done to the Lord of all the universe when he came to us in our people. Because we're all one people, our family, our fathers and mothers refused him and rejected him. In Isaiah 53, it tells us what it was like. He says in prophecy that Jesus was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. We didn't even want to look at him. And you may say, well, that wasn't me. I wouldn't have done that if I would have been there. We would have done that. And according to Jesus, we did do that. We all did it. And now we have a chance to make some of that right. And that's what hospitality does. So this is what John is talking about. John looks at hospitality in three ways. We're going to go through them very quickly. One is what we could call common hospitality. That's hospitality to the people you identify with religiously. Now, that's an easy thing. It's not, look, I've been a pastor for a lot of years in a lot of places. And even though I kind of enjoy inviting people over, I like cooking for people, I like doing those things, I understand it is not always easy even then. There are Christians, I remember being told this. I was very young at the time, but my parents tell of we lived in Michigan on a farm when I was very young. Went to a little farm community church. And my parents always, every Sunday, I don't remember a single time they did it, but every Sunday would invite somebody over from church for Sunday dinner. Every Sunday we went home with somebody and entertained them and fed them. Did it every Sunday. My whole life growing up. And they'd always try to figure out every Sunday who we can invite, who we invite. Well, there was a family there who were very hard to get along with. Very hard. They just were the kind of people that grade everyone the wrong way. And they were looking around, and their eyes kept falling on that couple, on that family. And they just kept averting their gaze. Don't make eye contact. Because it's like, oh, this is going to be a miserable time having them over. And they got so convicted, they realized they can't do that. So they invited them over. And they talked to them. And come to find out, a lot of what people experienced this discomfort was because she was dying of cancer. And they didn't know how to process that. And how to even talk to anybody without that being in the room. And they were overcompensating. And my parents were able to minister to that couple. And she died. But they were great friends until then. So yeah, I know, it's not always easy. But it's the easiest kind of hospitality. It's where you start. So you want to invite over someone really pleasant. I suggest myself. You can start there. I'll offer. No, I'm joking. I really am. Don't invite me. I'm terrible to be around. Start in the church. Don't invite your family members. Don't invite your friends. Some people you're comfortable with. Invite someone you don't know. Say, hey, come over to the house. Let me give you some crispy tacos. I'm just trying to tell you what I might want if you were to invite me. No chicken. No chicken. Rodney Stark was a sociologist. He started out as an agnostic, and over the course of his academic career, became an evangelical Christian because he dedicated almost the entirety of his academic career to the study of Christianity. How is it? He was intrigued by how it was that Christianity went from about 50 members to being the biggest religion in the world and overcoming the Roman Empire and tearing down the Soviet Union and everything else that Christianity has done. It intrigued him. How did that happen? Not from a miraculous view, not from a biblical view or a Christian view, from an agnostic view. He's like, something has to explain this. And so he wrote a very important book called The Rise of Christianity, Rodney Stark. And he wrote another one following that called The Triumph of Christianity. In these two books, he tries to go through and explain some of the reasons that Christianity was so powerful. And one of the things he says is because when you came into the Christian community, you were family. This is from a time, right, today we don't understand this as much because lifespans are so long. And you might know I grew up knowing my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents. I have a picture with 6 generations all living. That's not normal in the time of the ancient world. In the ancient world, you would not hardly know perhaps even your father. The mortality rate among men was so high. You certainly wouldn't know your grandparents. So you didn't have family. Family wasn't what it is today. So when you came into the church in that time, they treated you like family. You didn't have to earn a place. You didn't have to merit something. You didn't have to do it. They just welcomed you in. They just embraced you and brought you in, and immediately, you were family. He writes, even if they were newcomers, they were not strangers, but brothers and sisters in Christ. When calamity struck, there were people who cared. In fact, there were people whose job it was to take responsibility. They called them deacons. The early church set up an entire office of people whose job it was to care for people. This was unheard of. It was transformational. So we need to practice that. You can start there, that common hospitality of people in the church, not just our church. I don't just mean this congregation. We should be loving and hospitable to people in all churches. All churches. When people come here, they should feel welcome here. Quit worrying about, you have all week to talk to your family, all week to talk to your friends, all week. You need to search out the people who are new, who are visiting, and make sure they know that you care. Because you should care. Now, if you don't care, well, maybe you shouldn't do anything. Maybe you need to go address your own heart. This isn't about pretending to care. You should actually care because Jesus cares. Second thing John deals with, first he talks about being hospitable to the brethren. The second, we could call it uncommon hospitality. This was where it was uncommon in the world. It's still uncommon today. Christians were hospitable to the strangers, to those that weren't part of them, that didn't go to church, may never go to church. And if they didn't go to church, they didn't go, well, we gave you 3 tries, and you didn't want to come to church, so you're dead to me. That was not how they were. They didn't care for the strangers. They didn't care for the lost, so they would go to church. They did it because they were living Christ out in their life, and Christ cares for the lost. Christ leaves the 99 that are safe, and he looks for the one that's lost. Christians should care for the lost. Cyprian, who was a 3rd century bishop in the ancient world, a martyr, he wrote this. He says, there is nothing remarkable in caring or loving merely our own people. He says that the good was done to all men. He's talking about what Christians did. Their hospitality was done to all men, not merely to the household of faith. Christians in the first world, in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, they didn't just care about Christians. They cared about all people. It's where the idea of human rights comes from. It comes from hospitality. Now you say, well, all human beings have dignity. Do you realize that is not a self-evident truth? That is a Christian truth given by revelation of Jesus Christ, who says he cared about all men equally. And if he does, then everyone is equally valuable. If you don't have that basis, you have no basis. None. There's no base whatsoever for human rights without Christianity. There is none. And it's why you don't find it where you don't find Christianity. Rosaria, I quoted her book, I'll do it one more time. She says this: the Christian home is the place where we bring the church to the people. You hear what he says? You're like, well, I have friends that don't want to come to church. That's okay. You can take church to them. When we turn our Christian homes into places of care and hospitality and concern, we are bringing the church to them. Third thing he deals with, and we'll end here very quickly. We have the common hospitality, the uncommon hospitality, and we have transcendent hospitality. It's what I'm calling it. If you read 3 John, you'll see it just flows into these things. He goes from one to the other, and he's on this one. And this is where we show hospitality to the workers of the gospel, what we call missionaries. This church should be hospitable to people who are giving their life for the gospel. Not just send them an offering, although it includes that. It's not less than that, but it's much more than that. We should be caring and loving to those who are giving their life for the gospel. He says especially those that have taken nothing from the Gentiles. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have a job. It doesn't mean they don't work in a secular profession as well as be missionaries. That's not what he means. I know there's some that have the idea that if somebody missionary is working, you shouldn't give them offerings. That's nonsense. That's not what he means. What he means is that in the ministry of the gospel, they don't receive anything for that. They're giving the gospel for free. They might be building houses or programming or teaching English on the side, but when they go out and give the gospel, they do that for free. We should very much be partners with those kind of people. But here's the thing that John is saying, and I say this because we're going to have a discussion about this a little later in the year. We want to be partners with them, and we should. But they are supposed to be partners also with us. We're not helpers to missionaries, we're fellow helpers. And that is very important. Like I said, we'll deal with this later on. But as missionaries come to our assembly, we should be showing them hospitality, and they should be ministering to us as well. And it's how John sees the church working again. It's this reciprocal, mutual interlocking. We come together as a family, and we provide what one needs. We receive what one can provide. No one's too good or too proud to receive. No one's too busy to give. We reciprocate with each other. This is what John sees the church to be. And it's this vision of the church that made the church what you know it to be today. Now, we're slowly getting away from that. And that's not good. And there's not much we can do. We're a tiny little congregation. Nothing I'm saying is going to have any effect outside of this room right now. And I don't know that it'll have much there. But if you're listening and it's resonating, you can make a difference in your life for those around you. Many of us say, well, I'm not this very influential figure and no one listens to what I say. Why bother? I can't change anything. Well, that's just silly. That's silly. If that was our mentality when it came to parenting, we wouldn't parent, because you're not changing the life of all the children in the world. But your child, their life can be changed, and it matters to them. Maybe you're here in this congregation, we're not influential, we're not important, nobody knows who we are, they never will. But possibly this church has made a difference in your life. And to you it matters. You can make a difference in somebody's life. It may just be one person in your whole life, and it's worth it. Ask them. Ask them. They'll tell you, I'm glad you made a difference in my life. And ultimately, you can only make a difference in the people you have contact with. And if we withdraw ourselves and cut ourselves off and treat the world like it's rubbish, And the people of the world, we have no interest in them, and we're just holding on for dear life, hoping to get raptured out, and everyone let the whole world burn, then we've lost the plot. Jesus came not to receive, but to give. And he gave us the ultimate. And now we're called upon to follow in those footsteps, to follow in that legacy, in so much as he has granted us to be able to do. I'm going to ask you to please stand. We'll pray, and the musicians will close us out with a song. Dear Father in heaven, I thank you for the example of your Son, the ultimate in love, care, and hospitality. Nobody cared for those who were despicable like he has. And you cared for me, and you loved me, and you gave everything for me, and you made a difference in my life. And I thank you for that. Father, I pray if there's anyone here that hasn't experienced that difference, that they would realize that it's not you that's far away, they are. It's not you that's looking away, they are. It's not you that is ignoring them, but they're ignoring you, and that they can just turn towards you, commit themselves to you, that you'll fill them with your faithfulness, your righteousness, and your love. Father, I ask that you would help us live out what was cut short of your time, and that we would be your vicars, your representatives, that we would project your love, your care to those around us, those of the family of God, those that are outside the church, people that hate us. Help us to be loving and kind and truthful. Help us to be good representatives of your name. We ask this all in your name.